All right, so joining us, we have Dawn Leaf, and we've asked Dawn to kind of serve as a little bit of a transitive role for us, coming from NIST to Department of Labor. Dawn probably has one of the most unique perspectives that we can tap into today, and for you guys in the audience to understand how are some of the guidance under the NIST programs, whether it be the reference architecture or the use case scenarios, how can that be leveraged within an agency, and now being tasked with doing that at Labor, I think will give some unique perspective. Keith Trippie with Homeland Security has been kind of our stalwart here on the panel for 3 years, a fan favorite as well, and kind of shakes things up often with topics on different perspectives, and will be kind of our heavy on the conversation of FedRAMP hitting the road for agencies, and how can they roadmap to FedRAMP with industry and vendors like ourselves. Shawn Kingsberry, we've heard from you a little bit earlier about some of your perspectives on kind of what innovation means for agencies moving forward. I think with your role in recovery.com, oftentimes having an opportunity to maybe start from scratch from a certain perspective gives you maybe a little latitude and freedom to do some new things, and I think you're probably one of the flag bearers for kind of getting out of the gate strong. So we'd love to hear some things about recovery.gov. Scott Renda, last minute addition to the panel, could have joined us on the policy panel that we just had, but we're very fortunate to have his perspective here from OMB as far as what agencies are kind of looking for in the road mapping to new landscapes for procurement, how to acquire cloud, how to acquire some of the other innovations that are coming down the pike. And Kimberly Hansher, fresh off the plane, able to join us here this afternoon, and we're happy to have you from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. So please welcome our panelists, and it should be a nice lively discussion on a couple of topics. So one of the, in our pre-calls, we talked about some of the topics that we've hit in the last couple of years. I think change management being one of the themes that from the agency perspective is absolutely critical. If you in the OCIO departments and as CIOs and directorates are not helping your staff and stakeholders in the agencies understand what innovation can mean for them and in their mission, that can be a challenge and can lead to maybe some misunderstandings or confusion. So that's one topic that we kind of want to hit, is that change management aspect. But really getting it from general perspectives within each agency. I'd like to ask everybody on the agency side to talk a little bit about what is on the top of your mind innovation-wise. I mean, we've heard a little bit of perspective from some other agencies and some other folks on the policy side, but I'd like to ask everybody to kind of just hit for 1 or 2 minutes a little bit of just give some perspective of what your agency is looking at in the pipeline for innovation beyond cloud. Go ahead, Shawn.
Okay. First off, I know it's the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
So
keep it lively over there, Shawn.
Shake it up a little bit, right? Move a little bit. So really, I mean, I know from our perspective, our mission has been transparency of recovery funds, but in parallel with that, the whole fraud, waste, and abuse mission. And I could say and we've had, new life when you look at the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2012 that gives us the opportunity to look at lessons learned from recovery for federal-wide implementations and what have you. And now just recently we have, let's just say, more oversight responsibilities have been we can say we've been awarded, right? So the cool thing about that is from a federal standpoint, we look at it as how can we do things differently in a way that could open doors for the rest of the federal government, not just meet our specific mission. And when you look at it from that perspective, you come up with solution alternatives a lot. You look at them a lot differently, right? Because you say, okay, I can easily do X, Y, and Z, right? But in essence, if I think about the problem a little differently in ways that federal can leverage the outcome of what we do, and we can provide that as a blueprint and speak in open forums like this, you begin to look at it a lot differently. So from our perspective, it's, as you all know, we do a lot when it comes to cloud, whether it be public cloud, private cloud, cloud hub, and brokerage. Like we recently launched our own cloud hub broker and migrated mail and collaboration to Microsoft 365 and as their first customer, and several key pieces of infrastructure over to Amazon. And we have security controls on-prem that ensures all traffic goes through our compliance stack. So when you look at what this means now, looking ahead, what's interesting is now big data, mobile, cloud, and information assurance all go together. And then you say, how can we actually do more and enable the business to be able to work more efficiently to derive, from a fraud, waste, and abuse perspective, derive actual outcomes quicker, right? Leveraging that tool set. So we're actually doing a lot of investigation types of work from an IT perspective and information management standpoint in ways that we can say, well, you know, understanding the business, understanding the timelines of the law enforcement investigations and the process the analysts go through. And now we're actually looking at, with this infrastructure that we have now, how can we give them a tool set that supports the pervasive nature that analysts work in, and also the required connectivity. Because what we do is we have to bring in a variety of data sources and actually house it in our data warehouse. In some cases, we actually make connections outbound via web as well, you know, searching through New York Times and what have you, all within one context, from structured, unstructured data and web content within a common search to actually derive actual outcomes. So we're literally looking at how we already do in-memory computing with SAP. We have an Hadoop pilot, how we're actually coupling these things together. And we're actually looking at how now we can begin to look at the business and really transform this into a way that we can think differently. And that's the key. How can you actually leverage technology to meet business goals, to get the business side to think differently about how they actually can actually think about how they solve certain problems?
Great, and thank you, Shawn. And I think that perspective of kind of the new approach, the ecosystem approach that cloud has become, not only in the commercial sector, but as agencies are starting to consume, I think they're realizing, and we in the vendor ranks realize, that you're going to get and we're going to deliver more as teams. And that's probably good for innovation from many perspectives. A challenge for implementation and evaluation, though, certainly. Kimberly, thoughts? Obviously, with you guys being a big driver behind mobility, I think that's another topic that part, parcel, and locked arms with cloud is an interesting play that you might have some inside perspective on.
Sure. The agency really took a big hit budget-wise, and that was the key driver in our interest in revamping our mobile program. I was paying close to $1 million for about 560 BlackBerry devices. That's the voice and the data services. And I had no replacement plan. So they're real old BlackBerries that everybody's carrying around, and I'm paying an arm and a leg for them. So by kind of like you would analyze your own home cell phone bills, we've all done it, right? And then you work on optimizing your rate plan for your different, family members. We did that in our agency, and it meant really analyzing the usage for those government-provided devices. And that was one way that we lowered our cost. And then another thing that we really wanted to do was to offer choice, because so many people were saying that they really would prefer to use one device, or they would prefer to use the device that they're most proficient with, and it wasn't necessarily one of the older BlackBerry devices that we provided.
So a true BYOD is something that you were asked to maybe consider by your stakeholders.
Yeah, it was definitely hallway conversation. And I had been to a leading edge forum about 3 years ago and heard private sector CIOs at BP and Cardinal Health Systems talking about the reduction in cost. And I was just waiting for the right time to do it. And it seemed like the right time, although the more that I talked to other CIOs, the more that I realized everybody's talking, but very few are doing it. And so that's when I kind of looked at the risk associated with BYOD, what my agency's data, sensitivity is. And, the fact of the matter is that our agency doesn't have any classified data. We don't have any sensitive PII in our databases. something we took care of several years ago. And we don't deal with what I would call critical infrastructure data that terrorists might want. So who better than a small agency such as ours to kind of take that risk, push into, create a program framework, and then begin sharing it with other agencies.
I'm going to come back to one topic that I would like you to hit on because, not necessarily hitting maybe critical or sensitive information or intellectual property that you house within the agency, but for you, temporal speed is important in resolving, applications that come in or notifications that come in and moving them through a cycle of remedy. So that would be one thing that you might have a unique perspective on as well. Scott, your thoughts, because as a facilitator and someone is kind of a reference point for agencies in their approach to innovation, what are your thoughts through OMB and the perspectives that you bring to helping agencies roadmapping?
Sure. I want to just touch, as I answer, I think about something Shawn said about sort of this intersection of big data, mobile, cloud, and IA, and all those things working together. There's an article in today's Washington Post. It references a Cisco study. It says, by 2016, IP traffic would be 1.3 zettabytes, 110 exabytes. That is a tremendous amount of data moving through pipes. And when we think about all the data and all that change in the customer space, and that's really seeding how we think about innovation. So I think that's why, from the administration's perspective, serious about driving innovation and seeding it in all different parts of the organization. So thinking about the digital government strategy, where the growth of mobile and information-centric approaches. Thinking about the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, and I know my boss was here this morning doing the keynote, and I'm sure he talked about all the good results from round one and talking about some really interesting programs. You have minutes on the website, on the digital government website, the PIF program, things like RFP Easy and My USA, and we just kicked off round two there. Really thinking about how we can build scalable mobile platforms on cloud infrastructures, those that are elastic and buying by the drink, because we know as in that consumer space drives innovation, the interaction between the taxpayer and the government is going to keep changing. It'll keep morphing. It's going to go quicker, and that cycle will go faster and quicker and sooner. And so we need to really, we think about innovation customer first. Our customers are taxpayers. EEOC, RATB, labor, DHS, all very different missions, but we all work and speak on behalf of the taxpayer, and I think that's really how we're viewing innovation.
Great. Dawn, so in your transition over to labor, and I think your perspective is something that you can probably, map the continuum of kind of how this migration to cloud, as maybe the first innovation out of the gate under some of these new mandates in the last 2.5, 3 years, but then also helping agencies roadmap from the NIST perspective under commerce in how to do it in a measured way, but also kind of defining the core principles of it. Now you find yourself at labor in the role of implementation. Thoughts on that side?
Well, I was struck by something that my colleague David Leduc said earlier from NIST, where in developing the technology and the standards and the policy, Pat Gallagher once said that cloud was like learning to fly the plane while you're building it. And the implementation model is the same thing, just a slightly different perspective. Labor, we're very fortunate because our acting secretary, Seth Harris, our whole management team is totally committed to IT modernization. We have a very aggressive strategy over the next fiscal year or two, starting with a cloud email deployment that will touch every one of our staff, regional offices throughout the country, replacing our HR system with a shared services system that's government hosted, developing strategies for applying mobile computing. But with that said, where you're getting into building the plane while you're flying it, you're really transforming your organization while you're consolidating and moving to shared services. And it's not just the organizations who are giving up scope, it's the receiving organizations, because they're taking on more work and customers. You have to keep your legacy systems and services running without a hitch, with no interruptions while you're applying new technology. And you've got to strategically identify enabling technology, be it cloud, be it mobile computing, be it big data analysis, and plan for that at the same time. So it's a lot of moving parts. It's exciting and it's fun, just like the strategic side is, but it's no less challenging just because you're implementing.
And that many moving parts, Keith, somebody representing DHS and an agency that basically was several agencies put together, systems put together, liaising with not just federal resources and stakeholders, but at the state, local, and municipal level. I mean, DHS really, could be the poster child for many moving pieces and a lot of plates spinning at one time. That change aspect of how to employ innovation, I know that's something that you guys have had to address head on. Is that something you could hit on? I know it's one of our topics on kind of the primary challenges for agencies, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on kind of how to get there and how to metric against it, but any perspective on that, just being with an agency that probably had to deal with a little bit more on the legacy integration side than most?
Sure. So, coming from a small agency like DHS that's been around for, 100, 200 years, it's been a really easy problem to go solve. So, with any post-merger acquisition, the challenges you're going to have are people, process, data, systems, IT, and when it comes together, how do you make sure that you've got an enterprise approach that works for the many, while you're never going to find something that works for all. So, I mean, you've got to balance the enterprise and then the more local mission needs across something of this space. So, part of what we've been doing over the past 3 years is trying to transform and go after things that we feel are really commodity IT. We say the word cloud, I like the word commodity IT a little bit better. It's really platform and below services that we feel if we can help transform CIOs and support CIOs at the component or bureau level to move them up and focusing more on the mission space and focusing more on the business layer. That frees them up to focus where it counts and less on really the platform and infrastructure. So that's really what we've been doing over the course of the past few years. And I think what we found, I'm looking at a couple of my folks over there that have been with us for the past few years going through these travails are, change is hard. I mean, when we started this thing 3 years ago, I was 6'2", blonde hair, blue eyes, and now look what happened over the past 3 years. It's really gone south for me. For the department, it's gone great. So we are really transforming where we were and where we're going. 100,000 plus folks on email, 30-something thousand folks are on the collaboration. We're rolling out a thing called Workplace as a Service, which is where, and again, if I ever figure out how to do Wikipedia, I'm going to get this term in there if I can get it then. It's the consumer and it's the enterprise. Scott touched on that. The innovation coming around consumerism, and then the enterprise and the concept of a consumerism within the Department of Homeland Security. And really this thing called Workplace is where we're going to look to drive that around virtual desktops, mobile device management. So this is really what we're seeing around the change aspect of what I used to do today, am I going to be doing that tomorrow? We are certainly looking at ways around how would we help transform the workforce and create training curriculum and programs, and that's certainly something I'd like to work on with other federal agencies, OMB and others, is how do we create that workflow for a career path for typical IT workers that used to do one thing today, but in the future, if you're doing old IT infrastructure today, is that really the chimney sweeper job of tomorrow? So how do we help transform and position these folks to whether it's vendor management or business analysts or strategic analyst roles? I think we're a long way to go from that, but I think to transform the CIO role of the next generation, the key component will be how we transform our IT workforce into more of a value proposition rather than doing typical IT infrastructure.
Great, and I think that perspective on the culture shift, the change management is something that's going to be on the horizon and the plate for everybody on an ongoing basis. As we kind of get into the perspectives, the second topic that we really wanted to bite into was just the primary challenges for agencies, and I think you've all hit on it, touched on it in pieces. We've touched in other panels on the concepts of big data and data portability, and then the standards and open source. So maybe we'll kind of couch those for a later conversation. But I think that old to new, the legacy migration, is something that we in industry are kind of hearing. Hey, help us solve this problem. You guys, kind of got us there a little bit, but help us get past it. And for some of us that are maybe new entrants into the opportunities in the markets with agencies, we have some real solutions there that may not get the visibility that some of the established players have. So that's a challenge for us as vendors, but it is also something that we want to engage the agencies in, that road mapping. And one aspect is kind of looking at assessment. How much of that aspect of change management are you guys struggling with or capturing? Is it a key goal that you have before you make any move to assess just where are you, what's in place, what assets are good, what can stay, what could be extended to the cloud, for example, or to a mobility platform? Just thoughts from everybody on that perspective of kind of assessing before you move forward.
I mean,
You're the new kid on the block, go ahead.
well, from our perspective, you look at some of the opportunities you have in front of you to get the business to understand, well, to actually transform things so you can speak in the language that the business can understand. With me, like I said, I report to 13 IGs, which means that I live in a strange place, right? So when you look at what that means, I have to be able, before I start talking about futuring, I have to be able to transform the discussion into a business discussion and talk at the business level. And that's something that I can say I've learned from multiple ways. One, the experience and the journey that we came down. But in parallel, we wrote a white paper and we interviewed roughly 30 industry and federal partners. And out of that, what you learn is federal is real quick to go to the buzz and the quick discussion of the technology and what have you, opposed to hitting pause and actually looking at the business and business requirements and then using that to say, now let's talk about how this is going to help us get over the horizon. So communication is key, right? Before you get into all of the go do this new cool thing, it's like, well, first off, what is it that we're trying to do and how does it relate to the goals and objectives of our organization, our business, our appropriation, right? And then, now, what's the value that I get out of this? And now, what's the solution alternative? So when you look at what we did, right, as we started to make this migration of our internal systems, right, because initially we migrated recovery.gov to Amazon, right? And then we said, well, okay, well, now let's go ahead and migrate our mail and collaboration to Microsoft 365 and Amazon. Guess what? That wasn't an easy discussion either, right? Because now it's saying, hold up, now you're talking about what's behind the golden veil, right? So in essence, what we ended up doing was transforming the discussion into this is our business requirements, this is our appropriations, this is where we are today, and now if we augment our existing investment, our on-prem infrastructure, to a cloud hub / broker, in essence, I can now meet the requirements of the business when you look at information assurance. So in essence, what we did is we turned the discussion, we turned the whole discussion over into a network discussion and information assurance, meaning if I say, now all traffic has to come through here and I have complete visibility of everything, meaning all data, all flow, all auditing, and I really don't care what cloud provider we go to. In essence, you get what you need from a business standpoint that makes you feel comfortable, right? So, like I said, I think the biggest lesson is turn it into a business discussion, value-add discussion, and then start to look over the horizon of how you can get there in the solution alternatives.
Well, you know, I think one thing that I've heard this year more than the other years in the past of this conference is kind of the perspective of looking at it from a business challenge solution perspective and kind of looking, you know, whether it be Congressman Issa saying we want to give agencies an opportunity and an avenue to look for commercial best practices to bring in as innovations and improve, or if it is Steve Van Rokel saying we want to empower the CIOs through the council and their role to kind of look at best practices across agencies and share. And I think that assessment and then, you know, having a logical path forward is something that is you know, important, because the last topic that I wanted y'all to talk about before we end is what are the metrics of success, or, you know, ROI from a business sense, that you are trying to distill from these assessments before you move forward?
There's one more point off of this was the key that you know, you just mentioned and I mentioned is you can't do it without the partnership of industry and federal. So I did my own discovery to create this white paper, but in essence, I used that for market research. And out of that, that's how I put the solution that into my approach to address this issue. So in essence, it was critical for me to not only talk to federal, but also talk to industry on, okay, you say federal has these problems and these issues and what have you, how do you see addressing this, right? And that open discussion, I think, is what it reinforced my discussion to the board, right? When you look at, okay, this is what I did to prepare. So I just think it's important that we say industry and federal have to work together to lean forward.
More than ever, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I think that that's one of the sort of behaviors that distinguishes sort of the modern-day CIO is one who is truly a knowledge gatherer and a knowledge sharer. And you know, in terms of what are some of the primary challenges that I'm working with, as a small agency, costs. We're a very poor agency, but we're very geographically dispersed. We've got 53 sites and 2,400 people spread out among those sites. So for me, bandwidth is like the big deal. I have video and data all running over my wide area network, and I have only 2 T1s at all of those sites. So there's only so much traffic, you know, you can put on the wide area network. As we talk about the cloud, you know, I have to be very careful.
So the do more with less is absolutely critical for you guys, and maybe even the approach of kind of start small and then scale if it works in a small sample set.
Do you know, I have changed it a little bit. We're not going to do more with less. What we are going to do is our best with less. And so we're defining what our best is. And one of the things that strikes me is that, you know, I would say probably half of my 53 offices are located in federal buildings. That means that there's other large agencies with OC3s going into that building. Now, why can't I write on that? Okay, so that's the kind of thinking that I'm starting to do, because I know with the BYOD and just the mobile devices, when you really dig down and you think a little bit about what am I paying for, am I getting my money's worth, is this a fair price, you know, I know my next sort of area of concentration is going to be on my telecom costs, and how can I lower those costs but get more for it? Yeah. So that's kind of one of the things I'm thinking of.
And once again, I mean, that perspective is, you know, classic business. Look at your balance sheet and then, you know, look at the P&L and kind of move forward and move forward in a profitable way, but also deliver more for your clients and better, essentially. Scott, your perspectives on that and kind of the stop, think, and then move forward.
Sure. I mean, I think one thing I spend a lot of time talking with, whether it's industry, whether it's people, staffers, or Congress folks, whether it's a company, is there's a lot of times, Scott, what's the best cloud? Is the government buying a private cloud? Is it a community cloud? Is it a government cloud? And really, the cloud-first policy is agnostic on the cloud type. As Shawn mentioned, what we'd rather focus on is the benefit the customer gets from this solution. Cloud is a means to an end, not an end of itself, as is big data, as is mobile. The technology exists to serve a purpose. So we're interested in scalability, agility, innovation, and efficiencies. You can get cost savings, you get lots of these things, but really it's about what is the right thing for the business. And again, it's also about changing that relationship with the government, with the taxpayer. You know, and I think the other thing is when we talk about, you know, thinking about portfolio set, and you know, one of the elements of portfolio set is it's cross-disciplinary. It's your whole C-suite. It's the CIO, the CIO, the CXO, the performance officer. It's that whole C-suite across an agency. Because basically, you have with cloud and with mobile big data, you have customers or people in your agency who have, take someone in your general counsel's office, where their previous role had been perhaps from a risk mitigation or litigation protection point of view. Now they're going to be a customer for a cloud record solution. And they need to be brought in earlier inside the planning and assessment process to understand how their business is impacted from their perspective. Again, it really goes back to the customer.
Don, your thoughts on that? And obviously the role at NIST serving as, okay guys, let's stop and define cloud before we even start moving forward. And then let's map out standards and let's look at a reference architecture, and then let's look at the use case scenarios and where it can apply. Obviously that's going to be, you know, directly, you know, correlate over to labor.
So I guess a couple of observations on that. When we were working the cloud program strategically at NIST, interoperability and portability and security, our mantra was really just that, strategic. When you're in the trenches and you are the one who's actually helping to define a tactical strategy for your agency to move forward, then the fact that those things are being worked on, that's not good enough, okay? Because you do want to make sure that you can move between providers, that you have an exit strategy. And the other thing I would say is that we often trivialize something that has been done before. You know, we talk about cloud email like it's a walk in the park. Well, the truth is that when you change over email, you touch every single person in your organization. And they have business processes that are based on something as simple as email and office automation. So in our case, what we're working on is confidence testing, end-to-end scenario thread testing, just like we actually used it in NASA for flight ops systems, only it's to make sure that when we make a big change like that, we don't break something inadvertently as we go forward. And I suspect everybody's doing the same thing.
That whole systemic flow, the daisy chain of what could be impacted downstream that we're not necessarily aware of right out of the gate. So Keith, I'm going to ask you to hit on that topic, but then the next one we want to transition into, and we've hit it on 3 of the panels so far, is FedRAMP. But we want to kind of cover it more from the agency perspectives and vendor engagement once folks are kind of in process or applied in, getting their ATOs. But as our kind of JAB agency representative, we'd love to have your thoughts as we transition in that topic.
So FedRAMP, I'm a fan, a big fan. We're one of the big 3 that are helping to drive this in partnership.
That's the right answer.
Hey, I'm a big fan. Anything that took the Wild Wild West of how we all were unique. I was with Mike Smith from NASA. I don't know if you guys know him, but we're on a panel a few weeks ago, and he pulls out this little placard, this little white piece of paper, laminated, because he pulls it out a lot. And it said something to the effect of, we can't do that, we're different. And I quickly said, I have one like that, but it's a little different. So the point of it is, for us as federal agencies to collectively get together to say, we agree we now have a floor at moderate for security. Not that much, my moderate data, Don's moderate data, Shawn's, it's all moderate data, right? And we all have agreed to come up to that level. The fact that we've got one of the earlier vendors that have gone through that, all of our public cloud stuff, if you go to FEMA Gov, DHS Gov, TSA, there's like 8 of us or so, all that stuff over the past 8-9 months has been moved out into the public cloud. We're able to do that for a variety of reasons. It was going through the FedRAMP certification process, so I was able to go to each one of my different sub-agencies or bureaus, whatever the right word is for the folks in the room, and say, you don't have to go spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to go, take down a bunch of trees and write a bunch of documentation. We've done that for you. We have rolled the security controls up the stack, and we are all agreeing on what moderate is. What we've done in the department is we've gone to the next step and said, okay, great, we've got moderate now. As we look to get our centers up to the moderate standard, we're now saying, what would a set of high controls be within DHS, not outside the DHS, but within DHS that says, confidentiality, integrity, and then availability. The availability stuff, really, at the end of the day, that's not as heavy of a lift. I think there's been some good guidance by your former agency around that space. Where it gets really, really interesting is around the confidentiality and the integrity. Because there are dials you can turn. You could say, it's not all just a toggle switch on a control. It's, do you toggle the switch all the way up, or do you cut it halfway down? So we're going through those machinations right now, but we have developed a set of high controls that the department has agreed from the security perspective that works for us. We're now going to our 2 primary data center providers that provide cloud services, and we're implementing that under our development test as a service pre-prod environment. Ultimately, that will roll over to the production environment. This is something that really hasn't been done before, because now what we're doing is we get these controls out there. We're working with each of the different vendors that are building services on top of that stack and saying, what controls do you do? What controls do we do? Boy, I tell you, that's the right conversation to have, and we actually have something that says, when you're setting your dials, turn them a little bit this way, but stop there, and getting agreement that high set of controls within the department. So it is a bit of a game changer that we're experiencing here, and we're hoping to share more of that as we look for security in the future above moderate.
Fair enough. And I think, weighing in from the perspective of industry here and the vendors is, some of us that are maybe, looking for opportunities to prove ourselves with a broader base of agencies in maybe some of the innovative ways that you guys are looking to improve your mission. part of the challenge is that it's right out of the gate and maybe just the initial stages of kind of vendors making it through and the pipeline will continue to flow. But it's almost like there's a hesitancy within many of the directorates that might be at the contracting and program office level to say, should I really be waiting for vendors that are going through FedRAMP or at least applied for it to even engage with a dialogue? So one thought that, maybe if you guys could weigh in is, are your agencies looking at maybe through that assessment stage and evaluation of where you are and what should be moving to cloud? Are you engaging with folks from the vendor community that can help you with that may have commercial experience in that regard? And is that important to you or not? So some of the folks in the audience that might be able to fill that role, I'm sure they want to know.
What was that for?
Let's come back this way. Dawn?
So I think Keith's point about the cost savings and leveraging resources through an initiative like FedRAMP, that's really where it's at. It's not a question of choosing to wait or not wait. No one, it's been said many times, has extra money laying around to do duplicative work. So, that alone, achieving a defined level of security that satisfies your requirements and having a lot of the burden of that completed in advance, that's huge.
Kim, thoughts on
Yeah, actually, the way that I've approached cloud is literally cloud first. So if it can be done in the cloud and it's affordable, that's the way I go. Because I'm not building an empire, not building data centers. We have one data center, that's it, and hopefully at some point in the future we could maybe even split it in half, and that part will become a cafeteria, and that'll stay the data center.
Okay.
I really would like to have as much
The cafeteria, right?
Yeah, I really would like a cafeteria. But, we've embraced cloud providers for some of the obvious things like web meetings, okay? Agency-wide, we're geographically dispersed. We use web meetings every day. Most of our knowledge workers, do that as a natural setting rather than doing audio conference calls. We moved our financial management system to the cloud. Now, it's not a public cloud. In fact, I think it's one of the sponsors for this conference. It's GCE. It's a small company that provides for labor and EEOC, financial management services. We also have used real specific software as a service, like for complaints, EEO complaints within our own agency. So for us, it's as our requirements surface and we look at alternative solutions, we look at cloud-based solutions first. If for some reason we can't do it in the cloud or we can't afford what's offered in the cloud, then we'll do it ourselves. And oddly enough, for us, email, after looking at what it costs us to do email, and because of our bandwidth problem, we actually have found that we can do it at a cheaper cost than some of the cloud-based providers. But I expect over time for that to change.
Okay, and Scott, I did skip you intentionally because you're going to come back and you're going to kick off our last topic. But Shawn, your thoughts on that perspective from FedRAMP readiness and engaging vendors?
Well, I have two different views on it, right? First off, I think the intent of FedRAMP is awesome. I mean, it only makes sense to leverage the good work across other federal partners so you don't have to redo, right? I think that to me is the intent of good government, right? But in parallel with that, there's you have to get work done now, right? While that's being stood up. So I personally think that, and I'm going to go back to the interviews that I had with several, I remember we interviewed 30 industry and federal agencies, and the feedback that I got from that as well was FedRAMP is still being powered up, right? And in essence, you leverage what you can off of it from where it is, but in parallel, if it's not, that doesn't mean you stop moving forward and continue to lean forward. Similar to the person from our earlier panel where he said you got to have the evangelists that lean forward and step out ahead and continue to move forward, right? But then you still need to share that, right? So, I mean, like I said, that's why I said I have two different views on it. One, it's very important. Two, don't let what's not there stop you from continuing to lean forward and get things done, because to me, waiting isn't an option either, right? Lean forward.
So with that transition into our last topic here, procurement horizons, kind of what are priorities, goals? How do you expect to get there as agencies? But I'd like Scott to kind of weigh in from your perspective with OMB, and then also being sensitive to the vendors that are the other side of the equation at this conference is, we kind of look up the tower and, prancing by as what we think are we're the white knights, and the prince is looking up at Rapunzel, who's saying, help me, I have a challenge, I'm stuck up here in the tower, help me solve this. And we're just saying, let your hair down. We want to try and get in and help you resolve that. But oftentimes the challenge with bringing innovations to bear on maybe long-term, long-standing challenges is that in the public sector, the procurement cycles often make that difficult, and protracted cycles often make innovation even more difficult in solving those challenges. Just thoughts on that?
So I think one of the big things here when you think about cloud, it is the ultimate change management exercise on an everyday basis is, people, often I meet with companies and I say, we need to spend more time with CFOs and finance folks and contracting folks. I think we published a pretty cool white paper last year, which was based on some of these best practices that we were calling from the cloud first migrations, which talks about effective ways to write a cloud computing contract. How does buying compute as a service change a question around an SLA, around a service level, around a sovereignty, around the legality, around the standard? There are different ways to do it, and I think so there it's a matter of just best practice and taking time. Understanding that we are doing something different and that actually we care passionately. We talk about it every day, but I think the gentleman previously asked, how do we address sort of the cultural piece? You can't fix it by writing a memo. You can't do it once. It's something you do over and over again. I think the other piece is thinking about cloud and thinking about buying things in a modular sense. The beauty of a cloud is you don't have to have the huge capital outlay to buy all that iron. You can experiment, innovate in a way which says, let me try something and see if it works. If it doesn't work, you haven't made the investment and created on the back end what creates that sort of IT debt in a huge legacy framework. So you can come back and say, what, I tried in the cloud, that didn't work. Let me spin that down and spin something else up and try a different approach. So I think those are the couple things.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask a question, but not expect an answer. But does it take an act of Congress to change the procurement landscape for innovation? I mean, just throwing it out there. But I think there's other avenues, and the empowerment of the OCIO camps is really more the question of the responsibility, but with the entitlement to do it and have the opportunity to kind of evaluate it in terms that are important to the agency and the constituents. That's the real challenge, and that's what needs essentially to be solved. So for the folks from the agency side, just real quick as we kind of wrap up here and maybe take a few questions before we close and let everybody free for happy hour. Plan new procurements. Would you like vendors to engage on existing task areas that may be already defined that don't say it has to be cloud or it can't be cloud? Is that a reasonable way for folks to expect that they could still find opportunities as they may be going through FedRAMP and kind of looking for creative ways to engage with the agencies and meeting your goals?
So I can come back to how we actually migrated recovery.gov to Amazon as we leveraged our CLIN in our existing contract, right? I mean, that's kind of what you said, right? If you already have a contract in play, are there opportunities there to leverage CLINs on existing contracts to leverage cloud services? I think you can, depending on understanding your business requirements and understanding how you can transform business requirements into crisp technological requirements to the vendor, right? I mean, because that's something I can say from a federal standpoint, we don't do a great job of actually transforming business requirements into understandable technological requirements, right, that a vendor can actually solution off of. Like earlier, I asked how many technical people were actually in the room, and I said, now, how many of you actually get crisp requirements that you can build, right? Because if you can get crisp requirements, I know, trust me, I'm a technologist, right? You give me some crisp requirements, I can build it, right? The problem is that you got a communication or challenge on the federal side, and when you start to look at how we deal with decreasing resources In some cases, we're decreasing the wrong resources because we lose that abstraction layer.
Well, and I think that, Chris, what you're looking for also leads to the metrics for success. Are you evaluating that efficiently as you're moving forward, which is kind of the last topic that we won't hit on here because you're touching on it as we've gone along. So Kimberly, your thoughts on that and kind of how can vendors engage on kind of bringing innovation to the table? Are existing procurement methods the preferred for you guys at EEOC?
Well, I would like to see a little bit more success in strategic sourcing initiatives. We give it a lot of talk. I don't know that it's been very successful establishing vehicles that really allow us to use the power of our numbers. It sounds really good, but is it happening?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I honestly would love to have a wireless vehicle. And it's been in the works for an awful long time. And I still don't have it at my disposal, so I'm still paying too much. And, every month that goes by, it hurts. And so I would like to see a little more success in strategic sourcing. So what I mean by that is government-wide vehicles that have great prices because we've used our power of, numbers, our purchasing power, to get excellent pricing. And that would allow small agencies like myself to not have to do procurements, contract efforts, because I really don't have the manpower nor the expertise to do a real great job of negotiating. So I'd like to see a little bit more there.
Okay, thanks. Dawn?
Here's a case where my answer really doesn't change from when I was at NIST until I joined labor in November of 2012. Something that is very helpful to us is defined service level agreements that reflect what we're really buying now, services as opposed to components. And the only other insight I'd add is that from a department or agency level, this translates into what we have to do to set up service catalogs to then provide those services to our own internal organizations and agencies. There's a very close correspondence. So if there's anything that can help us to improve and speed up the procurement process, it's really trying to nail down SLAs as it relates to services.
Okay. And Keith, final thought on the topic.
I'm practically a wallflower on this topic. God, don't panic. It's not going to be bad. Here's where I think we as on the Fed side are kind of lacking. From a demand side, here's where our challenges are, and I would certainly expect the industry probably share some of these same challenges. We should be able, as CIOs, as program managers, be able to belly up to the bar, and the buffet table is full of pre-built, certified, and accredited capabilities that we can get at. That's one. Two, innovation. The innovation on-ramp for us looks like Fred Flintstone cruising down in the rock car. We don't have the ability to do that. If you look at any disruptive change models, whether it's in the private sector or even in academia, you do not see anything in the federal space that looks like it. We're 4 years down, and the disruptive curve line is flatlined. We've got to catch it as the disruptive curve line starts to change. We've got to be on that front end. And to do that on the innovation cycle, if industries come up with something creative and they can get it to the buffet table and it meets 508, it meets security, and it has some of the other federal requirements baked into the design, create an acquisition framework that allows that to get the buffet table faster so we can take advantage of it. Innovation could be newer capabilities. Innovation could be price drops. And then the third thing that I think that we need to have, which we certainly don't, is to maximize the federal buying power. And we talked about that a little earlier. There's no reason that an organization of my size can't realize the benefits of an organization, say, the size of DOD. And then us, EOC, should not be sitting there and saying, well, why can't I leverage some of those benefits? We are all part of the federal sort of landscape, and then creating an acquisition framework that accomplishes those three things would be game changers, I think, for all of us. So that's where I'm hoping we go. And then conversely, the 360 of that is, what does that do for industry? Well, there's a lot of things, I think, on industry side is that ecosystem that you guys are going to be working with to help provide value back to the government. That's changing underneath you. And I think the other side of it is, do you want to chase every proposal that goes out on the street? Maybe it goes somewhere, maybe it doesn't. You guys have bid capture funds that you've got to work for. there's got to be just a better model for that. And I'm hoping that over the next couple of years, there'd be an acquisition framework to accomplish those three things that provides value to the citizens, us, as well as you guys.
Well, with that, we're way over on time, but we really appreciate the panel's thoughts and diverse perspectives on kind of how to solve these problems, what it means for your agencies, how to engage industry. Folks like us that are out here, having an opportunity to play at the trough is important for us as well. I also want to point out for the folks that have attended that haven't joined the roundtables that the SIA and the Public Sector Innovations Group puts on. That's probably the best way to sit at the table with folks like the panelists up here. I think from last year, 2 years, we've had every agency except 2 that have come in and kind of joined us for those sessions. I think, Mike, we're booked out through almost the summertime. That is a way for not only for the agency folks to kind of come in and brief a room full of key executives at the industry side to let them know what your challenges are, what are you gnawing your teeth on, and then maybe come up with a roadmap for success with industry. But also for industry, it's a way for you to kind of offer your innovations up there in a creative way, but then also understand how the agencies want to engage and would like to engage. So I'd like to thank everybody and thank you guys for joining and staying with us, and enjoy a little networking afterwards.